"Mom, don't sit down. This seat is for our guests. You're not invited." Claire's hand pressed against the back of the chair, pushing it away from me as if I were an intruder. My fork slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a sharp clang. Daniel, my son, sat only an arm's length away. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. And there it was, a check for $3,800, lying untouched on the table. The same check I had written that morning to cover their mortgage. The same sum I had been sacrificing for nearly a year, while they dined in comfort. At that moment, I understood, my place in their lives was no longer at the table, but only at the bank. How could they do this to me? If you want to know how I reached this moment, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and stay until the end of my story. Because I am about to reveal everything that was hidden behind these words. My name is Alice Hudson. I am 64 years old, and for 30 years I worked as a nurse in a Charleston hospital. The corridors of that place are still inside me, the sound of heart monitors, the sterile smell of disinfectant, the long nights of holding someone's hand when no one else could be there. That job was not glamorous, but it was steady. It taught me discipline, patience, and the quiet dignity of showing up every single day. When my husband passed, I found myself holding not only grief but also debts that weren't mine. I worked double shifts to pay them off. Every envelope I sealed, every dollar I handed over, carried the weight of sacrifice. And yet I did it, not because I had to, but because I wanted a clean slate for my son, Daniel. I didn't want him to inherit burdens he didn't create. I wanted him to step into the world free. Daniel was my only child. I poured everything into him. I made his favorite chicken soup before exams, drove him to baseball practice in a car that rattled with age, and tucked money into his college textbook so he would find it later and smile. To me, helping him was never a question. It was the natural shape of love. When he met Claire, I tried to open my arms wide. She was younger than him by 2 years, polished, always dressed as if the world might take a photograph of her at any moment. She spoke quickly, with certainty, as though her words should never be questioned. At first I thought she was simply confident. Later I realized she was also entitled. Still, I convinced myself this was what Daniel needed, someone ambitious, someone modern, someone who would push him further than my quiet hands ever could. I gave them a down payment for their lake house, a beautiful place with wide glass windows and a deck that looked out over the water. It will be a home for family, I told myself when I signed the check. A home where I imagined birthdays, summers, laughter. Then came Claire's restaurant dream. She wanted a small place with exposed brick walls and rustic wooden tables. Daniel called me one evening, his voice rehearsed but polite. "Mom, it's just an investment. Claire's sure it'll work. We need about $20,000 to start." I wired the money the next morning. Not because I had it to spare, but because I believed in them. Because I believed family deserved a chance. When Liam, their son, was accepted into college, the tuition bill arrived like a silent alarm. Daniel asked if I could cover part of it just for now. I did more than that. I paid for the semester in full, $17,000. I told myself it was for Liam, not for Daniel or Claire. The boy had done well, and I didn't want him to carry loans before he had even begun his life. But gradually I noticed a pattern. Gratitude faded quickly into expectation. Claire never said thank you out loud, she said things like, "That helps," or "Well, of course, you understand how expensive things are." Daniel, once my sweet boy, learned to let silence hang until I filled it with money. I became their background system, like the hum of the refrigerator, unnoticed, constant, necessary. They grew accustomed to leaning without wondering if I had the strength to hold them. I cannot deny there was pride in me, too. Pride that I could provide. Pride that my hard years in the hospital corridors had turned into stability. I stood taller knowing my son lived in a lake house, that my daughter-in-law could introduce herself as a restaurant owner, that my grandson walked onto a campus without debt. But pride turned to bitterness when I realized none of it brought me closer to them. I was not sitting at their table as a mother, but standing behind it as a silent sponsor. And each time they accepted more, a small crack appeared in the ground beneath me. Now, looking back, I can trace the line of those cracks as clearly as if they were drawn in chalk: the house, the restaurant, the tuition, the endless monthly bills. And with each one, my place in their lives shifted. From mother, to helper, to financier, to nothing more than a seat they could pull away. It is strange how betrayals rarely arrive in one heavy blow. They come first as whispers, as small dismissals so easy to ignore if you are determined to believe in love. I remember the very first time I felt the air shift, though at that moment I brushed it aside like dust on a table. It was 2 years ago, on a warm spring evening. We had gathered at the lake house for Liam's birthday. The sun was sliding behind the trees, the water catching its last gold. I had baked my old recipe, an apple cake with cinnamon that Daniel used to request when he was little. I carried it to the table, the frosting just slightly uneven, the scent rising like a memory. As I set it down, I began telling a story, one I had told before but always liked sharing, about Daniel's 8th birthday, when he insisted on blowing out the candles twice because the first time he wished for a puppy and the second time for a telescope. It was one of those harmless family stories that remind us of how far we've come. But before I could reach the punchline, Claire interrupted. She tilted her head and said in front of everyone, her smile tight as string, "Maybe you shouldn't talk too much, Alice. Your stories are old-fashioned." The words seemed light, almost playful, but her eyes were sharp. A few guests chuckled politely, not sure which way the remark was meant. I forced a smile, though my throat had closed. Daniel lowered his gaze to his plate, silent. No defense, no gentle correction, just silence. I brushed it off. I told myself she was nervous, that the wine had loosened her tongue. But even as I sliced the cake, I felt the first crack form inside me. I still taste that moment more clearly than the cinnamon. After that evening, little comments began to appear, scattered like stones in the path. When I brought small gifts, a sweater for Liam, a set of kitchen towels embroidered with the lake's outline, Claire rolled her eyes as though I had cluttered her world. "You really don't need to bring things, Alice," she would say, but her tone was not gratitude, it was dismissal. Daniel's voice changed too. Where once he answered with warmth, he now cut my call short. "Busy, Mom. Can we talk later?" Later rarely came. Liam, my grandson, drifted as well. He stopped visiting on weekends unless I offered money for gas or a meal. I told myself he was young, wrapped in his own life. Yet I could not shake the feeling that I had become a wallet more than a grandmother. The humiliations were quiet, almost polite. No shouting, no outright cruelty. But they carried weight. At gatherings I noticed how plans were whispered without me. Vacations discussed, flights booked, dinners scheduled, and only afterward would I hear the echoes. "Oh, it was just last minute, Alice," Claire would say. Always with that smile, sharp and thin. Still, I stayed. I convinced myself these were small things, not worth breaking peace over. I told myself that families go through seasons, that my role was to support, not to question. But in the quiet hours, I felt the shift. I would sit at my kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator steady behind me, staring at the monthly checks I wrote for them. Each one heavier than the last. I told myself it was love, but beneath that justification was unease. I began to notice the way Daniel's eyes slid past me when I spoke, the way Claire's laugh at my words was not laughter at all but a subtle dismissal. I noticed Liam's absence, how his visits depended on what I could provide. The first crack had opened. I did not yet know how wide it would grow, but I felt it every time I reached for my pen to write another check. The paper smooth under my hand, the ink flowing easily, yet something in me resisting. That evening at Liam's birthday, Claire's words still ring in me, "Your stories are old-fashioned." Perhaps they were. But they were mine. They were the threads of memory that stitched my family together. And in that moment, I realized she had no use for those threads. She preferred the fabric of her own design, and in her pattern, I did not belong. Tension does not rise like a wave. It seeps, drop by drop, until you realize the water has reached your throat. That was how those 2 years unfolded after Claire's remark at the birthday table. The unease I once dismissed became routine. Each month I wrote a check for $3,800, covering the mortgage on the lake house. The ritual was the same. I would sit at my kitchen table, the wooden surface worn smooth where my elbows had rested for years, and open my checkbook. The pen felt heavier each time, though the amount never changed. When I tore the paper from its spine, the sound was like fabric ripping, a sound that stayed with me long after. I told myself it was temporary. Daniel had said as much, just until the restaurant finds its rhythm, Mom. But months turned into seasons, seasons into years. And still, I wrote. Whenever I visited, Claire acted as though my presence was an inconvenience. Once, I brought her a potted lavender plant. She took it with a thin smile, placed it on the counter, and within a week it sat outside by the garbage bin, wilted, roots still in soil. She could not even be bothered to rehome it. Holidays became lessons in invisibility. At Thanksgiving, I arrived with a pumpkin pie. Claire took it from my hands without a word and slid it to the far edge of the counter, behind the gleaming store-bought desserts she preferred. I sat quietly at the table while conversation circled around travel plans I had never heard about. "We're thinking of Mexico in the spring," Claire said, looking at Daniel. "Oh, yes, Cancun will be perfect," Daniel agreed. Not once did they glance toward me. Even Liam, once my little shadow, treated me with cool detachment. He no longer called me Grandma. Instead, he addressed me like a client. "So, are you helping with books this semester?" Or, "Gas is crazy expensive. Can you send something this week?" If I hesitated, he would follow with silence that pressed against me until I yielded. There were times I tried to share myself, to remind them I was more than a checkbook. One evening, I told Daniel about a patient I had once sat with through the night shift, how she sang hymns in the dark to calm herself. Daniel nodded absently, scrolling his phone. Claire checked her watch. The story evaporated between us. I began to notice that whenever bills arrived, my phone rang. But when joy came, a promotion, a good grade, a vacation photo, I learned of it through others, or not at all. My role was not to celebrate with them, but to sustain them in silence. The humiliations were quiet but sharp. Once, at the restaurant Claire had opened with my help, I stopped by unannounced. She greeted me at the door as though I were any other customer. "Table for one?" she asked, voice flat. When I reminded her I was family, her expression tightened, but she offered no warmth. I sat through a meal surrounded by strangers, watching her move from table to table, her laughter reserved for everyone but me. Daniel called less. When he did, it was always the same tone. "Mom, the payment's due." Or, "We're short this month, can you cover it?" I cannot recall the last time he asked how I was. Alone in my house, I began to hear the silence differently. The hum of the refrigerator, once a comfort, became a reminder of how constant I was, how easily ignored. The stack of bank statements grew taller on my desk, their numbers precise, unfeeling. I would run my hand over them, the paper cool against my skin, and wonder when love had become a ledger. I was excluded from vacations, family photographs, dinners where my seat should have been. And yet the bills found me. Always the bills. It was as if they had built a life with me outside the frame, but my money within it. I told myself this was what mothers did, that sacrifice was simply the continuation of love. But late at night, when the house was still, doubt whispered louder. Was love truly silent? Was respect so absent? The tension built quietly, steadily, like water rising. And I, still clutching my pen, let it rise. The evening of the dinner, when Claire pushed my plate aside and told me I was not invited, should have been the worst moment. But it wasn't. The true blow came later, when silence settled and I began to piece together what had been hidden from me. After leaving the lake house, I drove home through Charleston's narrow streets, headlights slicing the darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. The radio was on, but I couldn't hear it over the replay of Claire's voice. This seat is for our guests. You're not invited. At home, I hung my coat on the rack, still carrying the faint smell of the roast beef I hadn't eaten. I stood in my kitchen, where the candle on the counter had burned low, wax pooled like a small white lake. I wanted comfort, but instead I felt emptiness. That was when I noticed the envelope. It had been pushed through my mail slot earlier in the day. Plain, with the bank's logo in the corner. I set it on the table and made tea, but the steam rising from the cup did nothing to steady me. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a notice of activity on a loan. A personal loan for $25,000. My name printed at the top, my address below. My breath caught. I had taken no such loan. The paper trembled in my hands as I scanned the details. It had been signed by Daniel. My Daniel. And beneath his name was the faint line of authority, acting under power of attorney. Years ago, for convenience, I had granted him that power. He had asked gently, assuring me it was only so he could help manage bills if anything happened to me. I remember him standing in my kitchen, his hand over mine as I signed, saying, "It's just easier this way, Mom." I believed him. I trusted him. Now that trust was a knife. The loan had been drawn 3 months earlier. Payments already in motion, interest climbing. I saw the numbers clearly, each digit like a stone sinking into me. My son had borrowed $25,000 in my name, without a word. Without permission. I sat down hard in the chair, the envelope open before me. The candle flickered, throwing shadows across the paper. My chest ached, but no tears came. Just silence, heavy and cold. I thought of all the checks I had written, all the times I had said yes. The house. The restaurant. The tuition. And now this. Not asked, not even disguised as a request. Simply taken. I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. "Mom? It's late. Everything okay?" My own voice was steady, though I felt the tremor inside. "Daniel. I received a notice today. A loan. In my name. Signed by you." There was a pause. Too long. Then he said, low, "It was just to cover some gaps. Nothing serious. I'll manage it." "You'll manage it?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "With my credit? With my name?" He sighed, impatient, as though I were a child misunderstanding. "Mom, you always say we're family. This is what family does. It's temporary." Temporary. The same word he had used about the mortgage. The same word about tuition. A word that stretched years long and still had no end. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. "You signed without telling me. You used my trust." Silence again. Then, "Don't make this a big deal, Mom. It's already done. Already done." I ended the call without another word. My hand was shaking when I set the phone down, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I looked at the dress I was still wearing, chosen for what was supposed to be a family dinner. Slowly, methodically, I changed into nightclothes and folded the dress into a box. As I smoothed the fabric, I knew with certainty, I would never wear it again. Not for them. Not for a table where I was not wanted. In the silence of my kitchen, with only the candle burning low, I spoke aloud to no one. "This ends now." The betrayal was not only in the loan. It was in the ease with which Daniel had done it, the calm in his voice, the assumption that I would remain silent. That I would remain giving. That I would remain his invisible system. But the crack had widened into a canyon. And for the first time I understood, if I did nothing, it would swallow me whole. I slept without dreams that night. Or maybe I drifted in and out of one long, gray thought. When I opened my eyes, the light in my kitchen was thin and patient, as if it had been waiting to see what I would choose. The candle I'd left burning had cooled into a pale disk. I touched the rim with my finger, It was smooth, solid, final. I boiled water and watched the kettle breathe. The clock on the stove read 6:12. I pulled out my old blue mug, the one with a hairline crack that never widened, and filled it. The first sip steadied my hands. The refrigerator hummed behind me, faithful as always. I realized I had become that hum in their lives. Constant. Invisible. Expected. I spread papers across the table, the loan notice, my checkbook registers, bank statements in their stiff white skins, the file where I kept insurance cards and copies of the power of attorney I had signed for Daniel years ago. I dated each stack with a sticky note. I wrote figures in neat columns, the way I used to chart a patient's vitals. Numbers do not lie. They do not flatter. They look back at you without apology. The total I had given over 2 years, mortgage, restaurant gaps, tuition, gas, small rescues that were never small, sat in the center of the page like a stone, $92,400. I traced the digits with the tip of my pen until the ink bled a little circle. Then I looked at the loan line again, $25,000, taken in my name, accruing interest in the quiet. A bruise beneath clothing. I heard Daniel's voice from the night before, "It's already done," and understood how far we had traveled from the boy who once asked me, breathless, if stars could be counted. Somewhere along the way, he had learned that I would always say yes. And I had learned to equate love with rescue. I set the pen down and breathed. The room smelled faintly of coffee and lavender cleaner. Outside, a truck downshifted, the sound fading into morning. I felt the outline of my life, the cottage I had kept by myself, the garden I weeded, the hospital badge tucked in a drawer, the friends who had invited me to lunches I often declined because family might need me. I had made myself a resource. I had forgotten to be a person. It did not arrive as anger. It arrived as clarity. Quiet, cold, exact. I pulled the power of attorney copies from their plastic sleeve and read every word. My name. Daniels. The date, May 14th, 5 years earlier. I remembered the notary's pen, the polite stamp, Daniel's easy smile. For convenience, we had said. In case of emergencies. We had never named whose emergencies counted. I placed that document to the left, where the morning light struck it. Then I took a blank sheet and wrote impatient, ordinary script. Freeze automatic transfers. Revoke power of attorney. Audit all accounts. Update beneficiaries and will. Speak to no one until steps are complete. Seeing the list changed my breathing. The air entered without stutter. I added a 6th line, pack a small suitcase, and underlined it once. Not a threat. A preparation. A reminder that I did not have to sit by the phone like a switchboard from another century, waiting for their emergencies to light my panel. My tea had gone lukewarm. I drank it anyway. I took the dress from the box on the chair and lifted it to the window. Last night's resolve traveled back through my fingers. I smoothed the fabric and laid it away for good. I chose jeans and a soft gray sweater that held the scent of cedar from the closet. Comfortable clothes for practical acts. On the fridge door, Emily's postcard was pinned beneath a magnet shaped like a small tomato. Bologna, she had written in her round hand. Come with me one day, Grandma. I traced the inked curve of the word one. The invitation had no money in it, no request. Only a door. At 7:03, my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I let it ring out. Seconds later, Claire texted, "Last night was awkward. Let's stay on the same page. We'll talk soon." I placed the phone face down and returned to my list. The truth settled without drama. I could not teach them to respect me by funding their disregard. I could not bargain for dignity with dollars. The only language left was boundary, written in procedures and signatures. I opened the back door and breathed the cool morning. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chime stitched tiny notes into the air. I pressed the pen to the first item on my list and put time beside it, 8 a.m. Then I washed my mug, turned off the kitchen light, and felt the house grow quiet around me, not empty, but cleared. This ends now, I had said last night. This morning, it began. At 7:45 I gathered the documents into a manila folder, wrote my name along the tab, and slipped the power of attorney copy on top, face up, so I would not forget what had changed. I looped my keys onto a cord around my wrist, their familiar weight a small promise. When the clock touched 8 o'clock, I squared the stack and stood to leave. The list waited near my hand. The first call I made was to the bank. I sat at my kitchen table, folder open, the power of attorney copy on top. At exactly 8:01, I dialed the number. The representative answered with a script, cheerful but detached. I gave my information, my account numbers, then spoke with a firmness I hadn't used in years. I want all automatic transfers blocked, effective immediately. The line clicked, keys tapping on their end. I see you have several recurring payments to Hudson Mortgage Services. Stop them, I said. My voice was calm, but I could hear the steel in it. Of course, Mrs. Hudson. Anything else? Yes, I said. Revoke all powers of attorney associated with my accounts. As of this call, Daniel Hudson no longer has authorization. The tapping paused. We'll need written confirmation. You'll have it today, I cut in. Prepare the documents. I'll sign them in person. For once, silence sat on the other side of the line, not on mine. Then a professional yes, ma'am, and the matter was set. I hung up and wrote the time in the margin of my list, 8:27 a.m. Item 1 complete. Next, I called my lawyer, Mr. Jones. He had gray hair and a voice like gravel smoothed by patience. He remembered me from years ago when I had helped his wife recover from surgery. He agreed to meet within the hour. At 9:15, I walked into his office carrying my manila folder. The building smelled faintly of lemon polish. I sat across from him, placed the loan notice on his desk, and slid the power of attorney copy forward. He read carefully, glasses perched low. Did you authorize this? He asked. No. Do you want to press charges? The question lingered between us. I looked at the document, Daniel's signature flowing where mine should have been. My throat tightened, but I shook my head. Not now. What I want is control back. And protection. He nodded once. Then we'll revoke. And we'll adjust your will. For the next hour, he guided me through each line. I rewrote my estate plan with deliberate strokes. Half to Emily, my granddaughter who had never asked for more than my time. A portion to charity, 2 medical scholarships at the hospital where I had worked 3 decades. To Daniel and Claire, the legal minimum. Nothing more. When he asked if I was sure, I looked him in the eye and said, completely. We signed, stamped, filed. Each signature felt like a stone lifted from my chest. By noon, I walked out carrying copies in a new folder. My hands were steadier than they had been in years. On my way home, my phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Daniel. 2 texts from Claire, we need to talk. Don't do anything rash and this affects all of us, Alice. Think carefully. I placed the phone back in my bag, untouched. At home, I made lunch, just a small bowl of soup, and sat at the table with the folder beside me. I felt no hunger, only clarity. I wrote the 3rd check mark on my list, audit accounts in progress. Mr. Jones would handle the rest. That afternoon, I visited the notary at the bank. The clerk looked at me curiously as I signed the revocation papers. My signature came out even, each letter neat. The clerk stamped them with a dull thud. That sound was more final than any word. By evening, every automatic payment had been stopped. The mortgage transfer ended. The credit cards linked to my name were severed. Daniel's access dissolved in a few sheets of paper. At 7:12 p.m. my phone rang again. Daniel this time. His voice was tight, urgent. Mom, what's going on? The bank called. Payments are bouncing. Why would you? I let him speak until he ran out of words. Then I said, Daniel, I have made my decision. From today on, you will manage your life without my accounts. Mom, you can't just. I can, I interrupted, my tone quiet but final. And I have. Silence. Then anger breaking through. Do you want us to lose the house? Is that what you want? I closed my eyes. What I want is respect. What I will not do is fund my own erasure. Before he could reply, I ended the call. My hand lingered on the phone a moment, but I felt no doubt. That night, I sat in my living room, folder beside me, candle burning low again. The house was still, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like mine. I had not raised my voice. I had not struck back with cruelty. I had simply drawn a line, written in signatures and revocations, in ink and stamps. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground under my feet was firm. The fallout came faster than I expected. Boundaries, once drawn, reveal how fragile everything around them truly was. Within 3 days, the first call came, not to me, but to Daniel. The bank informed him that the mortgage payment had failed. By the end of the week, 2 more notices followed. Interest accumulated, fees stacked like bricks on his chest. Claire's restaurant, already struggling, missed payroll. Suppliers withheld shipments. Customers noticed the gaps. The front door remained open, but inside, the shelves thinned. Daniel's voice on the phone grew frantic. Mom, just restart the transfers until we catch up. Just 1 month. We'll fix this. I listened quietly, then said only, no. He did not understand that no was final. He treated it like a door that would eventually swing open if he knocked long enough. But I had locked it, and the key rested with me. Claire tried next. Her tone was softer, rehearsed. Alice, you know this affects Liam. He needs stability. Think of your grandson. I thought of him. I remembered how he used to curl beside me on the couch, asking for one more story before bed. And I remembered the coolness in his voice lately, the way he measured my worth by what I paid for. Stability had not been my absence, it had been their dependence. I have thought of him, I said. That is why he must learn the truth of responsibility. There was a pause, then a clipped goodbye. The silence afterward was louder than their words. For days, no one came to my door. No cheerful texts arrived. The phone stopped buzzing. It was as if, without money passing through me, I had vanished from their sight. And yet, through that quiet, I felt something I had not in years, peace. But consequences have their own way of arriving at doorsteps. A week later, Daniel showed up at mine. His face was drawn, his shirt wrinkled, a man suddenly aged by urgency. He did not knock gently. The thud echoed through my small house. When I opened the door, he held a letter in his hand, bank stationery again. They're threatening foreclosure, Mom. Do you understand? We could lose everything. I looked at the paper but did not take it. You mean you could lose what you cannot afford? That is not everything. That is a house you stretched beyond your reach. His eyes searched mine for weakness, for the old softness. But I had none left to give. Please, he whispered, a word I had not heard in years. Just help this once. I shook my head slowly. I already did. More times than I can count. For a long moment, he stood there, letter trembling in his hand. Then he turned, shoulders slumped, and walked back to his car. The engine sputtered to life, then faded down the street. Days later, news reached me through neighbors, the restaurant had closed its doors. A handwritten sign taped to the window, closed until further notice. Claire's dream, financed partly by my years of labor, had folded without announcement. Liam called once, his voice strained. Grandma, I can't use my card. It says declined. I know, I said gently. Those accounts were tied to me. They're closed now. But how am I supposed to? He stopped, frustration heavy in his silence. You'll manage, I said softly. It's time you learned. He muttered something, whether anger or disappointment, I could not tell, and hung up. The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked at the candle burning on the counter. Its flame was steady, unaffected by storms outside. The world did not collapse when I withdrew. Their lives bent under the weight of their own choices, not mine. The house payments fell behind. The restaurant folded. Liam scrambled for odd jobs between classes. For the first time, they were living without my invisible hand holding them up. And though they may have cursed my name in their frustration, I did not feel cruel. I felt balanced. Justice, not revenge. Reality, not punishment. The calls grew fewer. The visits stopped. My silence became its own message, louder than any lecture. They learned, in the space I left, what it meant to stand without me. And I, in my own quiet kitchen, finally breathed freely. A week after the restaurant closed, I woke to seabirds and a thought I had not felt in years: I could choose my day. No waiting for a message, no bracing for a request. I brewed coffee in my blue mug and stood at the window while the dawn softened the street. The loan files were put away, the list folded and complete. The quiet felt earned. I began to look south, toward a city I had always loved on weekend visits, Savannah. Brick sidewalks, drooping oaks, the river's slow shoulder. I took a Saturday train, walked through neighborhoods with porches like open hands, and found a building with narrow stairs and sunlight pooled on the floors. The apartment was small, one bedroom, a window over a bakery, a balcony barely large enough for a chair, but when I stood in the doorway I felt something lift inside me. I signed the lease that afternoon. The moving was not dramatic. I gave away the heavy furniture, donated the sets of dishes I had bought for imagined holiday tables. I kept what was mine in truth: the cedar-scented sweater, the chipped blue mug, my nursing pin, the postcard from Emily. In Savannah, I bought 2 plants and a white lamp with a soft shade. At night, the lamp made a harbor on the wall. Emily came down the first weekend to help me settle. She brought a roll of brown paper and labeled boxes in neat block letters. She opened the window so the bakery smell could drift in: yeast, sugar, cinnamon. We worked without hurry. "Grandma, you need a passport," she said, tapping her phone. "Italy is waiting." I laughed, the sound surprising me. We made a list and, for once, it had nothing to do with emergencies. I applied for the passport on a Tuesday, hand steady as I wrote my name. "I chose April for travel, shoulder season," Emily said, "when the crowd's thin and the light turns kind." She sent me links to little ghosthouses near markets, places where old women sat on stoops shelling peas. I bought a modest suitcase the color of rain and rolled it around the living room like a shy pet. In Savannah I built a routine shaped by my own edges. Mornings, I walked to Forsyth Park with a paperback tucked in my bag. I learned the vendors' names at the farmers' market. I volunteered 2 afternoons a week at a small clinic, taking blood pressures, listening to stories, handing out appointment cards written in clear script. The work felt familiar, but this time I left on time, the keys lied in my pocket. I found a seat that was mine, a metal chair on my balcony, where the air carried salt and the clatter of plates below. I drank tea there at dusk, watching the sky move through its patient colors. No one called to ask for money. No one punished me with silence. My phone was just a phone. Daniel's messages dwindled to formal lines about the loan resolution Mr. Jones negotiated. I answered when needed, polite and brief. Claire did not write. Liam sent one photo from his campus lawn, grass bright, backpack at his feet. He said he had started working evenings. I wrote back, "Proud of you." I meant it. On a quiet evening, I opened a new savings account labeled Simply Travel. I moved a small automatic deposit there each month. The act felt like watering something I had planted for myself. When the first statement arrived, just a few digits, I pinned it to the inside of a cupboard door with a magnet shaped like a small tomato. Emily and I practiced a few Italian phrases in my kitchen. She stirred sauce while I tried the words. "Piano," she coached, smiling. "Slow and steady." The smell of garlic and basil folded into the room. I set the table with my one good plate and 2 forks. We ate with the windows open. For dessert, we shared figs from the market and laughed when one slipped and left a dark comet on the tablecloth. I did not rush to scrub it. A mark from living. When my passport arrived, a stiff blue book with my name pressed in dull gold, I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my thumb over the cover. The apartment felt very quiet then, like a chapel for ordinary courage. I put the passport in a drawer beside my nursing pin. 2 proofs of a life that moved, that mattered. At night, the past still knocked sometimes. The voice that told me I was not invited. The quiet on the other end of the phone. But the knocks were fainter. I answered them with routine, with friends from the clinic who invited me to a movie, with the bakery clerk who set aside a warm roll when he saw me coming. I answered them by planning a morning in Campo de Fiore, where Emily promised the stalls would smell of oranges and soap. Freedom did not arrive as a parade. It arrived as a chair on a balcony, as a ticket email, as a key turning easily in a new lock. It arrived as yes to myself. And I found, to my surprise, that yes could be as powerful as any no I had ever spoken. I wrote a small packing list and slid it under the lamp: passport, scarf, photo, shoes, lavender soap. I slept with the suitcase open, its fabric breathing. Hush. I am no longer a background figure in someone else's story. I have stepped into my own. For years, I mistook sacrifice for love, silence for peace, money for connection. But respect cannot be purchased, and love does not live in ledgers. Daniel, Claire, and Liam now face the shape of their own choices. I do not gloat. I do not wait for apologies. I live forward, not backward. My days belong to me, mornings in the park, afternoons at the clinic, evenings on my balcony with the city breathing around me. Soon Italy will open before me, and I will walk through markets where no one knows me, carrying only what I choose. I have learned that boundaries are not walls, they are doors you close so you may finally open another. If this story touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe, and join me where silence becomes strength.